real Halloween horrors, terrifying true stories. This is Mr. H. You're listening to Masked Horror. The Phantom Caller. It started off as a strange little prank, a phone call every Halloween night. The first time, I didn't think much of it. I was watching TV with my now wife, and the phone rang. I picked up, expecting it to be one of the neighbors or maybe a family friend. But when I answered, all I heard was heavy breathing, then static. After a few seconds, the line went dead. Weird, but I shrugged it off. People pull stunts on Halloween, right? That's what I thought. The second year, it happened again. Same time, same number. I answered, and this time, the breathing was more deliberate, like someone was listening closely, waiting. My wife, Jennifer, thought it was creepy, but we didn't let it ruin our night. We had kids to take trick-or-treating after all. By the third year, the calls weren't just weird, they became unsettling. On Halloween night, the phone rang right after the kids went to bed. I picked up, already feeling uneasy. The voice on the other end was distorted, crackling through what sounded like a cheap voice changer. "You had pizza for dinner," it said, and then the line cut off. I stared at the phone in shock. I hadn't seen anyone near the house all day, and no one could have known what we had eaten unless they were watching. I told Jennifer and she laughed it off, thinking it was a coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was keeping tabs on us. The calls kept coming. Each Halloween, the voice knew more. What time I left for work, what book my wife was reading, and even what our daughters wore to school. It was always something from that very day, something so specific, it made my skin crawl. We called the police, but every time they traced the calls, they came from random payphones around town. Never the same one twice. It was like whoever was doing this was playing a twisted game. Then came Halloween night, year 4. The kids were at a neighbor's Halloween party, and Jennifer and I were home alone, trying to ignore the inevitable call. Sure enough, the phone rang around 10 p.m. I picked up, my hands shaking. The voice on the other end was calm, almost amused. "I'm closer than you think," it whispered. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. I slammed the phone down and bolted to check the windows, locking them all, double-checking the doors. I told Jennifer, and she started to panic too. We turned off the lights, trying to peer out into the darkness, but we didn't see anyone. And then we found the note. It was a small slip of paper tucked under the front door. "See you soon," it said, in messy handwriting. That's when we lost it. I grabbed the kids from the neighbors and we fled the house, didn't even pack a bag. We drove for hours that night, checking into a hotel 2 towns over. The police investigated, but they never found out who left the note, and no one saw anything suspicious. We never went back to that house. We sold it and moved states. For a while, things were quiet. No calls, no notes. But then, just a couple of weeks ago, before Halloween, the phone rang. I picked up, and all I heard was breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. Like the beginning of that nightmare so many years ago. The real haunted house experience. Ever since I was a little kid, haunted houses were my favorite part of Halloween. While other kids my age were excited to go trick-or-treating, I wanted something scarier. My older sister Sarah used to sneak me into the haunted house every year instead of taking me trick-or-treating. I was way too young for it at the time, but I loved every minute. The darkness, the jump scares, the feeling that something could reach out and grab you at any moment. It thrilled me in a way nothing else did. As I got older, it became a tradition. Every Halloween, I had to go to a haunted house. Even after Sarah went off to college, I kept going with friends. No Halloween was complete without that rush of fear. So when I heard about the haunted house attraction that year, I couldn't resist. It had always been a staple in our small town. Cheap jump scares, plastic skeletons, the kind of fun that brings back memories of being a kid. But that year was different. There had been rumors going around that the original owners had run into financial trouble and sold the place to a new owner. Apparently, there had been a death in the family and they couldn't keep the place going. No one seemed to know much about the new owners. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it was just a haunted house. What could really change? Looking back, I should have known better. I should have listened to that nagging feeling in my gut. But when Halloween night rolled around, I was ready for my usual dose of fun. I had no idea how wrong things would go. At first, the haunted house seemed like it always had been. Fake blood, cheap jump scares, and actors in costumes. But as we went deeper into the maze of dark rooms, things started to change. Some of the actors weren't following the usual patterns. They didn't jump out or scream like they were supposed to. Instead, they stood silently in the corners, staring at us. Their masks were old, cracked, and their eyes behind them looked demonic. There was something too real about the way they watched us. A few times, they even blocked the exits, standing there, refusing to move. At first, we thought it was part of the show, some new twist to make the place scarier. Then, one by one, people in our group started to just disappear. We would always go our separate ways and meet up at the end, but this time, it was just weird. At first, it was just small separations. You'd turn around and someone would be gone, but you assumed they had wandered into another room. But when we got to what looked like a dead end, and there were only 3 of us left, we knew something was wrong. The room had no emergency exits, no way out, and no one else around. That's when we started hearing the screams. They didn't sound like the usual haunted house sound effects. These were different, real, panicked. I banged on the walls, looking for a way out, but everything was locked. The floor creaked overhead, like heavy footsteps, and I started to get the sinking feeling that we were trapped. It felt real, too real, like we had been led into some kind of sick trap. After what felt like an eternity, we finally found an unlocked door, and we bolted out of there into the freezing night air. When we got outside, the scene was pure chaos. Police and first responders were everywhere, talking to groups of frightened people. Apparently, there had been multiple calls to the police about people going missing inside the haunted house. They searched the entire place and found a few people locked in different rooms, terrified but unharmed. But one girl, a local, had vanished completely. She had been with her friends earlier that night, but no one had seen her since. The police never found any concrete evidence to link her disappearance to the haunted house, but people in town whispered that she had been abducted from inside. The news eventually broke that a mentally unstable man had infiltrated the haunted house, blending in with the actors. The police believed he may have been responsible for at least one abduction that night. They weren't 100% sure, but they also never found him, which still freaks me out till this day. The haunted house was shut down permanently after that, and the new owners disappeared just as quickly as they had arrived. Years later, people still talk about what happened that night. Some say the girl's body, who was never found, was somehow swallowed up and buried beneath that house. Who knows? I don't know what to believe now sometimes, but looking back, what haunts me the most is that look in the actors' eyes, the ones who stood in the corners, watching. Were they really just part of the show? Were those lifeless stares just an act? Or had that deranged man gotten to them somehow? Maybe something far more sinister had been lurking behind those masks all along. Something we weren't supposed to see. I guess I'll never know, but I've never gone near a haunted house since.